Hello. Today we're going to talk about narrativization. What is narrativization, you might ask? Well, an in-depth exploration of the topic can be found in the forthcoming Zero Books publication, Times Lie, The Narrativization of Life, out on April 24th and available to pre-order now. But as a brief overview, narrativization is the process of constructing narratives out of disparate events. The problem with this is that it relies heavily on the perception of events and therefore is entirely subjective. However, the good part about this is that some narratives can be rallied around by many people and have universal appeal. But what do we mean by narrative? Narratives are not solely confined to fiction, books, comics, movies, and so on, but are the very real structure of how we perceive and arrange our lives. In real terms, we are merely the stories we tell each other. While this is not a new observation, Russian formalists developed the idea of narratology back in 1928, there is contemporary need for reappraisal due to the somewhat frivolous usage of the term narrative in today's media. A quick web search of your favourite topic with the word narrative after it, or just typing the word narrative into Twitter's search bar, will reveal its heavy overuse today. The biggest issue with this, however, is treating it like narratives are naturally occurring objects, akin to, say, a weed. They are not. Narratives are constructed and, depending on how they are presented, they can be adapted to suit certain needs. Understanding this is of vital importance to the left because, so far, we have fallen far behind the right in telling a good story. A good example of this is the narrative surrounding the left itself. Given the constellation of issues affecting the globe today, with a near unanimous understanding of their cause, you would think a left-wing argument for our betterment would be manna from heaven for most people. Yet despite this, in 2019 the Conservatives only increased their vote share by 1.5 points, yet won a resounding victory in UK Parliament. And despite huge popular support for Bernie Sanders and his winning of the first 3 caucuses, Biden is back to being the frontrunner for the Democratic candidate. Somehow, despite left-wing policies being near universally accepted as being the way forward, their antithesis is what is being elected. Now, of course, there is a myriad of issues that make up the reasons for this situation that requires nuanced and complex unpicking, except the right don't bother with any of that, and are still winning convincingly in public votes. A lot of this is to do with the story that's told about certain topics. Understanding what Brexit is, or was, depending on how you look at it, from a left-wing perspective is a complicated mix of growing disenfranchisement due to economic pressure amongst the working class, skyrocketing poverty and inequality that was blamed on foreign nationals and migrants by vested interests, a growing disgust of centrist politicians and politics among the population, the fact that the EU was always a capitalist structure and the problems that come with that, and so on and so on and so on. From the right, it was a very simple and entertaining story. The EU is controlling you. Free yourself from it. No matter how many facts you threw at this argument to negate it, no matter how inaccurate or untrue this story was, it didn't matter. It was the better story. Centuries of stories of questionable authority about Britain's successes resisting Europe, a piece of geography that is notoriously combative with itself, is a far deeper story than economic stress, foreign students, exploitative business owners, hegemonic capitulation, etc., etc. The Leave narrative wasn't true. The story they told about the EU wasn't true. But it feels true. Precisely the same thing happened with Trump. His appeals to the nostalgia of his generation and how great the good old days were is what got him elected, ignoring the fact it wasn't that great for a majority of the population. From the left's perspective, what got him elected was a complicated web of media insistence and legitimization, powerful lobbyists, a historically unpopular Democratic candidate, and so on and so on and so on. A far more complicated and less inviting story, to say the least. Whereas all Trump does is tell stories. Stories about how great it was, how great it is going to be, how great he is. It is the story that is convincing, not the facts. The biggest issue for the left here is how we have allowed our movement to be narrativized without our input. While we were bogged down in ensuring the right people get the right representation and that the right wealth gets redistributed in the right way, so that the most amount of good goes to the most amount of people, We have been defined as a useless, virtue-signalling bunch of SJWs who are frankly out of touch with reality and just bloody rude on Twitter. It should be a source of all our energies to halt the narratives that turn some of the longest-serving politicians in the UK and USA, who have always voted against racism and been on the right side of history their whole careers, into anti-Semitic or racist demagogues and outright terrorists that are a threat to democracy. None of this is true, but when it is presented as true and taken up by a media desperate to remain relevant that thrives on narrative, what did you think was going to happen? At a time when the left is needed most, when our ideas and policy agenda would change the world as we know it and improve the lives of almost everyone across the globe, we are losing. When a movement based around basic human rights for everyone and generally just trying to do good against a nakedly corrupt and openly evil opposing movement, you would think this is an open goal. But thanks to a radical centre hell-bent on civility over a duty of care to those most in need, who are desperate to maintain a long-evaporated sense of status quo, and a right-wing movement who have given up all pretense of anything but raw individualism, the left is stuttering and fumbling for the right words. We're telling the wrong story. Despite every narrative available to us being about good versus evil, the fact we live in a time when actual fascists have cast themselves as the good guys in this particular story should terrify us all. What's worse is we're not telling a better story in response. Everything is on our side. We have more people behind us, we have history behind us, we have scientific evidence behind us, and yet the best story we can come up with is that Biden is cognitively impaired. Or Boris Johnson is a racist, sexist, homophobic lying thief, something he has never denied and actively seems to thrive on. All this instead of telling the story of a bold, new, diverse, accepting society that will be better and more fun for everyone. As a movement, the left is telling the wrong stories. Let's get better at that. And you can do that by liking this video, subscribing to Zero Books, and pre-ordering a copy of Time's Lie, The Narrativization of Life. Today we learned what narrativization is, how everything we do is a form of narrative, how this has been used to define the left, and why we need to start telling our own story before the imminent recession kicks in during a pandemic and climate disasters increase while our literal fascist rulers start mining catastrophe capitalism with human lives. Be sure to note this down in your textbooks as these topics will come up in future videos. Thanks for watching.